So, now that I've given my intro in a very dramatic way, that does not in any way knock anyone who's used those note cards to share really bad stories or sad stories. It's an effect. It's just a little much for a sourdough starter. But anyway, I thought it was kind of funny. Like it says, sourdough starter. That's what I'm going to talk to you about today. There are a lot of different types of sourdough starters. There are a lot of different types of sourdough breads recipes, and there are a lot of different techniques in producing those sourdough breads. Today I'm just going to talk to you about starters, though, and I'm going to talk to you about a very simple one. I did find it on YouTube. However, there were a few things I think that could have been done differently to make it a little bit easier. And there were a few things that I didn't understand when I started that I think I can help clear up for someone who's new to making sourdough. First of all, the first thing you want to keep in mind is what type of bread it is that you're wanting to make with your sourdough. Um, I wanted something that was versatile. I wanted something that I could use to make rye bread, wheat bread, just regular white sourdough bread. And I'm sure you can use just about any starter to do that with. I just kind of wanted something that was a little more hearty, that used, I guess, more than one type of flour for the starter. And so once you know what type of bread it is that you're wanting to make, you need to get a few items. You need to get your flour, and the flours that I used are kind of like the same ones the gentleman in the video used. There are obviously store-bought brands you can buy. There are organic brands you can buy, or you can mill your own flour. I would like to mill my own flour at some point, but I'm not there yet. Excuse me. So right now I'm just using store-bought flour. So when you think of flours, you kind of need to decide what you're going to use, and if it's cost-effective, really, to do what you're going to do. Organic, I'm not sure how expensive it is, but there's different, I guess, qualities of bread available even at a grocery store. I've actually done quite a bit of research on flour the last couple of days, and King Arthur is a really good brand for a lot of different reasons, but they use less preservatives, and it's less chemically treated than a lot of other flours are. So anyway, I will show you what I used as far as my flour, and then I'll talk to you about a couple of other things, and I will tell you how exactly I did my starter and what I would do differently next time. So the first flour I used was this Hodgson Mill rye flour, 100% stone ground. And I did a mix of part rye, part bread flour for my starter. And so this is the other flour I used, the bread flour, Gold Medal, any grocery store, Walmart, Hy-Vee, Winn-Dixie. I mean, any store should have these. And then if I hadn't used the bread flour, I probably would have used this just Gold Medal whole wheat. However, some of the heartier flours take a little bit longer, and I didn't really want to do that because I'm kind of impatient. I like bread and I like baking, so I didn't want to wait days and days and days for it to ferment beyond what is normally required. So a term you will come to see if you do any research on sourdough at all is 100% hydration. And what that means essentially is you use a 1-to-1 ratio of flour to water. So if you use a cup of flour to feed your starter, you use a cup of water also. Now, when it comes to water that you're going to use, you want to use something that is filtered or distilled. You don't want to use tap water. And the primary reason you don't want to use tap water is you are wanting to create bacteria and yeast in your starter, and so you're wanting to eliminate chemicals that would inhibit or retard your starter. And so chlorine is used in tap water if you're on any type of city water. So you want to use something that is filtered. You want to filter that tap water, or use bottled water or distilled water. So and the water temperature, you want it to kind of be lukewarm to warm. You don't want it to be hot, but you don't want it to be cold either. You can either nuke it in the microwave, or you can, I just heat up a pot on the stove and toss my water in it, just heat it up a little bit, because we don't use a microwave at this time. So beyond your water and flour, the temperature that it's at. Now, you can store your starter in the refrigerator and pull it out before you make bread to let it warm up and kind of reactivate. But when you're doing your starter, there may be people that do it in the refrigerator. I didn't. So as far as what our temperature in our house is, it's probably around 72 to 73 most of the time. Right now we're in the middle of October, and it gets up to 75 to 77 in the day. And then when I woke up this morning, it was 69 to 70 degrees in our house. So ours is done just fine in those temperatures. You also want to have, it doesn't matter if you do the starter in plastic or in glass, you want to make sure that you've got something, a cover for it that fits relatively snugly, relatively snug. And at first you want to use like cheesecloth, or a loose, a towel of some sort. Right now, since it's the time of year it is here for us, we are still kind of battling some fruit flies, and the fruit flies like the sourdough. So I make sure that the towel that I use covers the bowl completely up under the bottom of it as well. So the actual recipe that I used was a half a cup of rye flour to a half a cup of bread flour and a cup of water, so 1-to-1 ratio. I stirred that up in my bowl, covered it with my cheesecloth, let it sit for a day. The recipe said to dump out half and then feed it a total of 1 cup again, and 1 cup of flour, or 1 cup of water. I didn't want to waste it, so I went ahead and fed it the same amount and didn't pour any out. Day 3, I fed it, and by midday, I fed it early in the morning, and by midday, our house smelled like baby vomit. If you don't know what baby vomit smells like, it smells like vomit, but just from a baby. So yeah, I don't know. It was very pungent. The whole house smelled like it. Everyone complained. There was wailing and gnashing of teeth. Not really, but there were a lot of complaints. And so I did a little research and figured out that, I really should have poured out half of my starter on day 2, like they said. And so I went ahead and I did, even though I didn't want to lose my starter in the 3 days I'd already put into it. So I poured a little bit out, and then I fed it again. Day 4, bam, it was back. It was frothy like it's supposed to be on top. It had a sour smell, but it didn't smell like some people describe dirty socks. It wasn't musty. It just had a hint smell of sour, which is what you want because you're making sourdough. And so on day 4, I went ahead and pulled a little bit of it out for 2 reasons. Number 1, I couldn't wait any longer. I wanted to try. I knew it was activated. I knew that there was some yeast present and bacteria present. So I wanted to go ahead and make a loaf of bread, which I did, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But also I wanted to deplete my starter so that I didn't have to pour any out down the drain, and so that when I fed it, it would continue to produce. So I went ahead and made my loaf of bread, and it came out great, perfect. I ended up baking it at I ended up baking it extremely early in the morning. But when my kids got up around 8, from 8 to noon, the loaf was like gone. There was like a little piece of the hill that people fought over at one point. but it was a really good loaf of bread. And from that point on, I used it each day, which depleted it a little bit, and then I kept feeding it about the same. Actually, I think I cut it back to like a half a cup and a half a cup of water, half a cup of flour, which maintained it actually pretty nicely. Um, and so the things that I've made with my sourdough starter, I'll tell you about that real quick, and then I'll tell you what I would do differently next time. I ended up making just the sourdough loaf with the bread flour, which was more like a white sourdough loaf. I ended up making it's called Berliner Hausbrot. It's a German basic rye bread, and it does use standard yeast sourdough starter combination. Um, it came out perfectly, and then I did a wheat sourdough loaf. And I was actually kind of nervous with that one. I wasn't sure my kids were going to dig it, but they all actually really enjoyed it. Um, and for most of those recipes, all I'm using is just the sourdough starter, water, flour, and salt. And that was one of my goals, is to eliminate, you know, number one, I wanted to know what was actually going into my bread. I wanted to actually see it. And short of the flour, I am. And I didn't want any additional sugar or preservatives or anything like that in there. So I've been really happy with that. So what I would do differently is this. I would start off with probably like a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of flour to 2 tablespoons of water. I would do that for probably like the first 2 days. Then the next day, on day 3, I would probably do like a fourth of a cup of flour to a fourth of a cup of water. And I would probably do that for days 3 and 4. And then as your sourdough starter is starting to really capture and make use of the yeast and bacteria that's present in the air and possibly in the flour, at that point, I would probably start doing a half a cup to a cup feedings leading up to the 7-day mark, because depending on what your temperature is, I would probably just play it safe and wait for 7 days to actually use it. But I would slowly build up. That way I didn't have to pour any down the drain. One other thing, there's actually a lot of different things you can use your sourdough starter for. And you might want to try some of these other things ahead of actually doing your bread. This morning, this is actually day 8 for my starter, and today we did for breakfast. I did pancakes with the starter, and they were really good pancakes. They were light, they were fluffy, they had a really good flavor. I'd probably add a little bit more sugar next time, but they were really good. You can make cinnamon rolls. You can make pizza crust out of it. I mean, there's so many different things you can do with sourdough. So many recipes out there. The one I'm using is just very, very basic. But anyway, this is just to give you an idea of how to do your starter. The reason I would start off slower is because what I researched and found out is that on day 3, when my starter smelled like vomit, it was doing that because it was starving. It was producing. I'm assuming kind of like it was eating itself. It didn't really have anything else to eat. So I think it had started, instead of eating fresh flour, it had started just kind of dying, I'm assuming, and it was producing gases from that. And so when I poured a little out and then added to it, I gave it something to munch on, and it bounced right back. This is my first round with it, so perhaps that's something that happens with every starter at some point. But that's been my experience with it. So I've baked a lot in my life. I'm looking forward to using the starter with a little bit of milk instead of buttermilk to try and use it in biscuits to see what happens with that. But anyway, I hope this gives you an idea of what a typical sourdough starter can be like. The recipes that are online. I've seen a lot of really cool ones. I've seen a lot of really complicated ones that add a lot of other ingredients. I just didn't want that. I wanted something really simple, and kind of less is more was my mentality with as far as ingredients. Number one, to make life easier, and number two, to make the bread healthier for my family. Um, so if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I'm not an expert on the sourdough, but I do bake a lot and have baked a lot in my life, and I have messed up a lot of things and have learned a lot from it. Um, so if you have any questions, feel free to post them below, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. If I can't, you know, Google and YouTube, they're priceless. So anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye.